All right. Well, welcome to the podcast. Patty, how you doing?
Great.
Good.
But where's the song?
Where's what song?
Uh-oh.
My song.
Drum roll, please. We actually have a special guest on the podcast today, and we've got an intro song for him so you know who it is. Here's the song.
This is concerning.
It's a clue.
Oh, nice. Nice.
John Helms.
John Helms is here.
6'6" and weighed 245, kind of broad in his shoulders.
Big John.
Is this the tune that people think when I walk around, just kind of
Absolutely.
plotting? Here
Get
he
the
comes.
smoke machine going this morning for Big John.
Nice.
That's a 6'6", 240.
245, I think.
That's you? Are you
That's a
6'6"?
little off.
Yeah.
A little, few pounds lighter, a few inches taller. So the
6'6",
bad
that
direction
is.
in both ways, I think.
That's a big old boy.
Yeah.
Well, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I missed this opportunity with Rachel. I should have got her to talk more, but I think a lot of people know of you, see you around. You've done announcements, you've preached some, and you've got a Sunday school class. But a lot of people just see the upfront, fancy, talks eloquently
Work, John.
version. Yeah, work, John. Yeah, absolutely.
Not fun, John.
But we know that there's a fun side to you too. So I'd love
There
to
can be.
just tell us a little bit about yourself, John. Introduce yourself. Tell us the fun side of John Helms.
The fun side of John. That's a high task. First of all, thank you guys for inviting me to be on today. I'm sure neither Patty or Cameron will be surprised by this, or a lot of our listeners after they hear me. But this is the first time that I've ever been on a podcast before. So
Wow.
Pastor Jeff
There you
talked
go.
this Sunday
No
about
pressure.
the A team and B team of disciples. I feel like you guys are the A team because you guys have been working this thing for a while and doing so well, and I'm the B team coming in. So we'll see if I'm ever invited back again. But
We weren't going to tell you, but
yeah, I know it, and I like to kind of lay it out on the line at the beginning. So there it is. But really, guys, y'all do such a great job with this each week. It's fun, it's thought provoking, and it's really just a great resource for our people. So thank you guys for committing the time to do this each
John.
week and having the fun to do it. It's a gift. So so the story of John and making it fun, that's going to be tricky. But yeah, I was born in South Carolina. I grew up in Kentucky, raised in family who just love the Lord, love the church. So earliest memories are going to potlucks and getting hugs from older ladies with blue hair and leaving makeup all over my nice sport coat that I was probably wearing as a child to church.
no.
But yeah, went to church a lot, was real involved in school, athletics, but lived a lot of my childhood like I was going to receive favor, love, approval from people by the way that I performed. And I ultimately lived like I could receive that same love and favor and approval from God. So it was at an 8-year-old that I heard the gospel probably for the 100th time, but finally surrendered to it. And then immediately began showing some fruit in my life, but kind of ran after the American dream, wanted to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, wanted to be a good Christian, do the church thing, but that was just kind of be another plate that I spun. So kind of lived like that until college, went to Clemson to study civil engineering, was there for a day, or a civil engineering student for a day at least, and recognized that wasn't the calling for my life. So it was after the first day of college that I finally surrendered to the Lord's calling, and then transferred to Western Kentucky, met my wife. We've been married for about 10 years. We have 4 kids, 4 girls, which is a lot, but a lot of fun too. And yeah, we love being out of Emmanuel.
great.
That wasn't super fun.
Nope. That's what I was about to say. Thanks for sharing your testimony. Now tell us about Fun John.
Yeah, Fun John. I can't really like force Fun John. Fun John's more just kind of natural, well, sometimes it's natural.
Well, then make
it's
it natural. Tell us about it.
Fun John-
What are things that Fun John enjoys to do? And when I say Fun John, for our listeners, there is a very cut and dry, like John is either in work mode or he is in fun mode.
Yes, Work John and Fun John.
So tell us what Fun John enjoys to do in his free time.
Fun John enjoys sports. I like playing basketball, baseball, football. I like having fun and just laughing. I like to play
Fun John likes
video
having fun?
games. Not video games. I said video games. That was weird. I haven't played a video game in a long
That
time.
was weird.
I did like N64 when I was a kid, though.
Dude,
Yeah, big
N64
big
is where
fan
it's
of NFL Blitz, Cruising USA.
Yeah.
Those were good games. But yeah, I like playing games, card games. I might look more like a reader these days, but I like to play sports, competitive. So yeah.
And you like the think a lot card games too. You don't
I
like
do. I like to strategize. I don't like speed games like Nerds and stuff like that. I'm not into that.
You probably hate apples to apples, and
I like apples to apples. Yeah, it's fun. There's not much strategy involved in it. There's a little bit of strategy.
some.
I tend to make most things strategic or competitive in some way.
Yeah.
I like indoor go-karting. We did that last week. That was fun.
That's true.
My hand is healing.
Jeff's still recovering.
He's bitter.
Is he still recovering?
and Will's still bitter about me spinning him out. but
Oh
it's
yeah,
fun.
yeah. It
And what
totally
was your
worth it.
placement? What was your rank in the go-karting?
I was fourth.
Number 4.
I was just off the podium.
Yeah, B team for sure.
But if I wasn't
Yeah.
going to get first, I mean, fourth is totally fine. Yeah, that is the definite. That's a good B team reference. That might be C team or D team, actually.
You were first of the B team.
Yeah, I was first off the podium, which is like worst. If not first, you're last, right?
Oh man. Well, John,
So
thanks
yeah, I
for
hope
being
that
with
was
us.
more fun. Maybe you can cut my lame testimony.
It was a little.
No
more
testimonies
fun,
are
but-
lame. You should have said that, but you didn't.
No, well, that's true, but we want fun John for the podcast, not
Fun
lame
John for the podcast,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Or
We're going
cheesy
to talk
John.
about work stuff and fun and biblical stuff,
Nice.
but we still want.
So I'll
fun
try to
John.
incorporate a little Fun John into my biblical seminary responses.
Jeff specifically told
Yes.
me not to let you get cheesy. So
Yes.
if you get cheesy, I'm gonna call you out on it.
Yeah. Jeff always makes fun of me because I give the book responses. So we'll see how that goes.
You sound like a seminary professor
Yeah.
when you get into that mode.
Yeah. I'll probably get into that mode a little bit today. We'll see.
I'll call you on it. if
You'll
you
call
do.
me.
Yeah.
We'll just make me stop.
We'll figure it out.
Should there be
Just-
a code word?
we need just picture little Angel Jeff on your shoulder when you start getting in that mode. You just hear him talking to you.
Yeah.
I may whisper to you too,
Yeah.
but
Whisper
All right.
for everyone to hear.
alrighty. Well, we'll jump in. So this Sunday we were this second to last Nehemiah message. Actually, we're in chapter 9 and 10. Really, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about raising the bar, going to the next level, what it looks like for us to raise our commitment, and some of that was, with our 4G2C, our capital campaign, stewardship campaign, fundraising. But really, a lot of it is for our staff, for where we're at as a church, for the body as a whole. And so that's kind of the what's happening here in this section of Nehemiah, what they're doing. So Jeff kind of pulled some stuff out of that. But it was a great message. But I think we've got some good content and questions that we can talk about. We had a couple questions that were submitted. I'm going to try to go ask questions, some that I came up with and some that were submitted, but kind of go through the order of the message so it flows well. But to get us started, kind of with this idea of raising the bar, going to the next level, what that looks like, where's the balance of, working hard, raising our commitment level to the next level, with also allowing God to lead and work? How do we keep it from being about how hard we're working instead of the Spirit moving and the Spirit working?
Yeah. That's a great question. I love it. It's something that I honestly personally struggle with a lot. By nature, I'm ambitious and goal oriented. I'm a pull up your bootstraps and get to work kind of guy. And so in my flesh can definitely be prideful and think that success is based off of how well I work, how hard I work, how will I think through things, how will I lead through things. And so how do I balance this biblical call to be humble, to trust in the sovereignty of God with the way that, like, I feel like God has wired me to be ambitious, to be goal oriented, to try to move the ball forward? Is that sin, or is that good? And
Yeah.
so I read through a book a couple years ago called Rescuing Ambition by a pastor and leader. His name's Dave Harvey. And it really helped me kind of think through this idea a lot, that really all of us are created by God. We're wired for glory and we're wired for ambition. And here comes a seminary answer for you. So I'm sure Jeff's going to already start rolling his eyes. But God created all of us.
You've already quoted somebody too.
I
so
did quote somebody, but
We're going to change his name to Big Cheddar.
yeah, it's an orange book that sits Big
Of
Cheddar.
course.
That's funny. One of my buddies, if he listens to this, he will laugh at that because his nickname for me was Big Gouda.
There you
Because I
go.
was big, but I was kind of fancy like Gouda. I called him Big Cheddar, so that was my nickname of him.
Cheddar.
But
That's awesome.
But yeah, God created all of us to ultimately glorify Him. He created all of creation to glorify Him, to worship Him, to place Him at the biggest weight in our lives. And our problem is that we worship all the wrong things. We worship the creation rather than the creator. And because of that, our ambition is off as well. Yeah. So our ambition is driven by ourselves. It's driven by what it is that we desire. And so we perceive that. And so because of that, our view of work is wrong. So we work so that we can earn favor, so that we can feel good about ourselves, maybe so that we can put money on the table. Those are the ultimate drivers, as opposed to the glory of God being the ultimate drive, and then what ambitions he gives us being the ultimate drive.
Right.
Because the reality is that, like, the mission of God is pretty ambitious. Like, he wants us to not only glorify him in our own lives, but he wants us to make more glorifiers of him, more worshipers of him, more disciples of him to the ends of the earth. And
not just, not just one or two, but to all nations.
Yeah. Like, that's ambitious. And God gives us that desire. And he not only gives us that desire, but he gives us the ability to do it.
Yep.
And so it's not a surprise that we're ambitious, that we want to move the ball forward. We've just got to make sure our motivation behind that is right.
Yeah, that's good. Patty, you have anything on that?
I would just echo that keeping perspective and balance in order is key for any believer, especially those of us who are goal-oriented overachievers. And to be able to ask ourselves at the end of the day, Lord, did I steal any of your glory? Because that should never be the case. We honestly should feel a little bit uncomfortable when we receive compliments in doing the Lord's work, right? Just a little bit uncomfortable. I think that helps keep us in check, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When I came to Emmanuel, I was in a very work hard, task oriented, like perfectionist mindset, and so I would stay up here way too late on nights and get very frustrated because things weren't going as fast as I wanted them to go. And really, through Jeff's guidance, he kind of humbled me and brought me back in a lot of ways. And
do you say this kind of stuff when he's here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You encourage him?
Yeah, and then he hates on me, but it's fine.
I'm sure. Sorry, I had to hate on you because I knew he would have said something right there.
This is a drama-filled room today.
Yeah, for real.
Wow.
It's drama.
Drama.
I don't normally bring the drama. That's normally not a part of the work, John.
Jeez, the drama.
But he brought me back to a place for, like, ministry-wise anyways, of, like, we're not changing everything tomorrow. Like, there's time, we take it a step at a time, take it a day at a time. And so now shifting, or really kind of this new idea of raising the bar, raising our commitment level. So I've kind of struggled with it over the last few weeks. So this is why I wrote this question as we've talked about it. Because my bar is already pretty high. So what does it look like to raise that? And so last night I called Jeff just to kind of get some clarity on some of this stuff. And too, at the end of I was thinking about this on Sunday when he was reading the passage in Matthew. At the end of it, Jesus is saying, commit to prayer and fasting. So to me, that's saying, like, it's not about us. It's not about us doing anything more. It's about the Spirit moving and what he's doing. So then how, just this tension of raising our bar, raising our level of commitment while also following the Spirit's lead. But really, I think his idea with it is it is raising our level of work is a big part of it. And it goes hand in hand. The more we follow the Spirit's lead and do the work that he's called us to, then that, we are his hands and feet here on this earth. But also his big focus is the work, but it's also the commitment level. And so that's really what gets into some of these next few points. But, in Luke and in Matthew, parable of the talents, and then another parable that Jesus is giving, he's saying multiple times in Scripture, being faithful in the small things. In Matthew, it says, I'll make you rulers over much. And in Luke, it says, being faithful in small things, you'll be faithful. I know you'll be faithful over much. And so it's so that kind of gets into these next points of being faithful in our relationships, being faithful in our priorities, being faithful in our finances, which is where we get to in Nehemiah. And so really raising, because I asked him, like, okay, so if it's a commitment thing, what does it mean for us to raise our level of commitment? And really raising our level of commitment is when we are fully committed, we are faithful with the things that God's given us. God's given us, whether it's our family, our lives, our job, our finances, all of these things that we have here, when we are faithful with those things, God says, okay, you've been faithful with that. I know that I can give you more. And so there's for sure kind of this idea in Matthew, which is what he was getting to, that God doesn't fully release his power just anywhere. But when we show that we are fully committed and faithful in the things that he's given us, that's when he entrusts us with more and allows, more ministry. And that's not to say that the smaller churches or the smaller ministries aren't being faithful. There's specific places for specific things. It's like God has a plan through it all. And so it's not at all to say that, but as we are continuing to press forward, and this is a staff and this is the body as well for you as listening, for yourself, for your family, for your job, for whatever it may be, being faithful in what he's given to you and then allowing him to work and to use you for more. So it's a really big concept, and that'll kind of set the stage for what we get into for the rest of this. But
that's good.
That's good. John, I also say that's good a lot. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I've listened a little bit. That's one of your go-to podcasters.
It's also
things to say.
Even in our life group, anything.
It's also weird to say things like the listeners.
Yeah,
it's just this abstract concept. Like, who's listening right now?
I have at least two people in my brain that I'm thinking of every time I say listeners.
Oh yeah, who are they?
I'm not going to tell you who it is.
Oh, come on!
But I've got two people in my head.
You can't do that. Not tell us.
Maybe
off the podcast later.
After, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
it just can't go out on the interwebs, right?
Exactly.
That was probably one of those cheesy comments, right? When I say interwebs.
Interwebs. That was for sure cheesy.
Wow.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Don't ever say that again.
Put that in the vault. Keep it there.
All right.
Lock it up.
Yeah.
Lock it up.
All right. So kind of getting into, so that was setting the stage really from the message. Then we got into Nehemiah a little more. And the second point was the demand of next level living. So as we raise our commitment, raise our level. And then the first point under that, coming from chapter 9, is that we are willing to separate ourselves from unbelievers. Now I know in the 10 o'clock service, we were running short on time because of parent commissioning and some other things. So Jeff was having to rush through some of it. If you do listen to the message on the podcast, I actually posted the 11:15 service this week because he had more time to go through it, and it's much more explained. I won't say better, but
Jeff kind of lets loose in the 11:15 service. He doesn't have the time constraints. Yeah, it's a sweet service to go to always.
It is.
But with that idea of separating ourselves with unbelievers, that seems to go against the Great Commission. So one of our questions that was submitted this week is how do we balance that idea of separating ourselves from unbelievers with, relating to people in the world, be in the world but not of the world, and just generally the Great Commission. And did Jesus actually live this idea of separating ourselves from unbelievers out? So
yeah,
floor's open.
Great question. Yeah, we do have that kind of Christianese concept in our mind of being in the world and not of the world. Which I think is biblical, but a lot of times we say those kind of things and don't really know exactly what we're saying, and that's one of those that's kind of vague enough that it feels good, but we're not sure exactly what we're saying. And so this idea of separating ourselves from the world, I think what Jeff was getting into, and I hope he does because I'm about to say it, is this idea of separating ourselves from the world. It's really the idea that he was getting at was this idea of holiness.
Yeah.
So to be separated is to be set apart, is to be different, is to look different. And that's absolutely a biblical concept. We're called to be holy people. Now, being holy people doesn't mean that we're just awkward and cheesy and never can hang out with non-believers. I know I said that to set you up. You're welcome. I'm glad you took it. But yeah, I mean, the Great Commission calls us to make disciples of all nations and all peoples. And so how are we supposed to make disciples if we're just completely disconnected from the world and disconnected from people? And so this idea of holiness and the Great Commission really connect, because as we are out in the world just kind of living our everyday lives, we should be living so in a way that is different. It is set apart, that people see us and they think, man, you're different. And then our love of God can then overflow into our conversation with them as we seek to kind of display the gospel to them, but as we also seek to proclaim it. So, and Jesus obviously perfectly modeled that.
Yeah.
He came to this earth. He was perfect, and yet he came to identify with us. And then he was out and about in the world, hanging out with beggars, hanging out with tax collectors, hanging out with the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Right.
And he was just living his normal life and doing his thing.
Yeah.
But he was doing so in a way that looked different.
Yep.
And people saw that and recognized that.
Yep.
So because of that, the words that he gave them were so much more powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's spot on with keeping holiness at the front. Also, you think of Jesus I think one of the big points that Jeff's referring to here is not separating ourselves from unbelievers to a point of we never spend time with them, never go with them, never reach them. But one of the things that he said in our conversation is that we have to separate ourselves before we can reconnect. And so he actually shared a story that if he was with us, he would probably share. Jeff shares a lot of stories. I give him a hard time because I said rambles one time and then he got all offended by it. But he really just has stories that tie to the points. But
yeah, I'm not really a storyteller. I kind of keep it simple. And
get
to the point.
Yeah, a little cheesy with it. But.
A little cheesy. Try to throw a little cheese in.
But he said when he remembered when he first got saved, like he heard the gospel, got saved, responded to it, and he immediately came home and told one of his good friends, like, dude, you've got to get saved. Like, you've got to hear this. You've got to. And so his friend quickly, like, actually got saved that night. They prayed. And so he said a few years ago, he was talking to him and said, I feel like I pushed you into that. Like, I kind of rushed you into doing that. And his friend, even, years after the fact, said, you didn't rush me into anything. That was the first time I ever actually heard the gospel. Wow. And so a friend that he had gone around, that had partied with, that, he shared a little bit about his former life before Christ, but, was involved in all of these things. Now, for the first time, heard the gospel and responded to it, and it changed his life. And so for us, I think we use our unbeliever or our sinner friends as an excuse. There's a lot of people that use their sinner friends as an excuse to still be a part of that lifestyle or still do the things that they want to do. But then they use that, well, I'm in the world, but not of the world. I'm not as, I'm not as bad. I'm not doing as much, but I still have that opportunity. And so it can go a bunch of different ways, but we have to separate before we can reassociate. And it's not separate to the extent of like, I can't talk to you. I can't be with you. We've been called to go and make disciples. So we have to talk to non-believers to share the gospel with them. But Jesus didn't come up to the woman at the well and get involved in what she was doing before he shared the gospel with her, before he showed her love. He loved her immediately. Yeah. And so for us, and maybe this is a good kind of follow-up question to that, for people who have been saved for a long time, maybe got saved at a young age, and still have those friends, or even maybe after the fact made friends that maybe aren't the best for the lifestyle that we should be living. How do they take the step now that they've been saved for a long time? Maybe these friends know that they're saved, but but they've got their life with us too. So how do you change from that polar opposites to an extent lifestyle to starting to live, a separate life from the way that we're called to live?
Yeah. You have thoughts, Patty?
Jeff referenced, the demand of next level living. He referenced the importance of spending time in God's presence. And when I think of separating, there's also an element of preparation. And so if we haven't adequately prepared ourselves, seeped in the Word, spending time with the Lord, then we're not ready to integrate. Yeah. And we can be pulled in, and we can become instead of looking like Christ and modeling Christ. So I thought that was a really interesting point to insert with the demand of next level living. And his exact words were, the more that we're in his presence, the more we realize we need him. Yeah. And that's true. And then he moved into separate from non-believers.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, as you guys have been talking, I've been thinking about the story of the demoniac, like the demon-possessed man. Yeah. And how in the Gospels it gives the story of this man, obviously, who had been separated from society. I mean, he'd been ripping out of his chains because society didn't really know what to do with him, so they just sent him off to kind of live in the grave as an outcast. Yep. Jesus shows up. The man immediately changed, but then as Jesus is leaving to get back on the boat with his disciples, the demoniac, I get this picture in my head, demoniac, that's such an old seminary way to say it. The demon-possessed man is there, and I kind of think about all the disciples, the A-team, Peter, James, and John are getting on, all the other guys that we don't know their names are getting on, and then the demon-possessed man's like there, he's ready to get on the boat, and Jesus kind of stops him, and he's like, no. And the demon-possessed man's probably confused, like, why on earth can I not come with you? I need to go with you for 3 years to just sit underneath your teaching and learn from all these great guys. Yeah. And Jesus says, no, I have a different plan for you. I want you to be a missionary. I want you to be my ambassador right where you are. Mm-hmm. So go back into this community that you've lived in, that they've seen your life, and just tell them about what I've done for them. Because the reality for us is that we don't need 3 years of preparation. We don't need 3 years of seminary classes, though I think preparing and studying and seminary is a great thing for people who are called to pastoral ministry specifically. You can probably tell that from my responses. Yeah. But the reality is, like, we don't need all of that, because when God saves us, he gives us his Spirit. Right. He immediately transforms us, who it is that we are, to be his ambassador. So for us, the first few years after becoming a Christ follower, honestly, can a lot of times be the most years that we're able to be out and around non-believers, because we already have so many of those relationships already.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in them seeing that immediate change in you from, like, the demon-possessed man, like, dude, this guy was in shackles. He wasn't in his right mind, and yet now he is in his right mind. I can't imagine how powerful that was.
Absolutely.
So for people who've been a Christ follower like me, I mean, I turned my life to the Lord as an 8-year-old. So I'm not quite to 30 years yet of being a Christ follower, but I'm getting close to it. Like, I have to force myself in rhythms to get around non-believers. Yeah. And I try to do that through just things that I enjoy doing. Like we talked about, I like to play basketball. So I play basketball with people. And when I'm sitting on the sidelines not playing, I try to get into conversations with them. Yeah. But that's a forced rhythm for me. It's not as natural as that person who might be a new follower of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we saw that play itself out in New York too, and really many mission trips. But I love Global Gates. Their mission behind that of, like, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you may have heard this, but we went to Jamaica, New York. So there's a large Bengali population there, large Muslim, Hindu, a lot of those religions there. And so when we are going out to find those people of peace, believers in the area, people who are curious about the gospel that we can share the gospel with, the goal is for them to then, it's not that Global Gates, the white people in the area, are going out and sharing the gospel and changing the community. The goal is that you find someone who's sensitive to the gospel that can respond or is a believer, that then they can go to their people that they already have a relationship with and share the gospel with them. And so kind of that infiltrate from within mindset, really, that's the idea of the demoniac.
There we go.
Demoniac. Demon-possessed man and what all he went through, and that's really the most effective way for us to share the gospel.
Yeah. When you're used to being in Christian culture and you go to a place like New York or the Middle East or even Greenville, South Carolina, our team that just got back from there, you very quickly realize how much, like, your vernacular and just your day-to-day rhythms are so Christian, and how weird and awkward they are when you get around other people, because when you get around just Christian culture all the time, like, you're just used to having Christian conversations, doing Christian things, and those are good things. But then when you get around people who aren't doing those things, it's like, whoa, life is way different in the real world. And so that's a challenge to the listeners.
Yeah.
That was weird to say, but that's a challenge to the listeners of just, and a challenge to myself too. Like, make sure I'm not so much in the bubble that I just become not even relatable to people who are non-believers.
Right.
But then, like, our partners in the Middle East, when we were just there a few weeks ago, they told us kind of in our training, like, don't be weird and don't force it. Like, I know that was so hard for me, right? They said, don't be weird and don't force it. Like, just be yourself. Gospel, spiritual things are probably just going to come up in normal conversations, and they should, as, like, our love of God overflows into our everyday conversations. It should just come up. And when it does, take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So that's that balance between the work of God and the Spirit of God, kind of like we were talking about earlier a little bit.
That's cool. And that's challenging for all of us, but I bet it was very difficult for you.
Oh yeah. Not to be weird and corny and cheesy.
Yeah.
And not to have weird seminary conversations.
I'm relatively cheesy. You just take more the Christian cheesy side.
Yeah. I do it intentionally. Like, when there's a moment to insert some awkwardness, I like to do it.
And those big fancy Christian words.
Yeah. I don't use the big fancy Christian words a lot.
Yeah, you do.
Not Christian words. I just use big fancy words in general sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I don't know any of them, so it's fine.
Yeah.
We're on opposite ends.
I know.
Jeff also mentioned, he briefly mentioned kind of Middle East followers of Jesus, Christians. And I know you wanted to respond when he said something about it. But I'll give you a chance now. What, like when he mentioned that, when people in the Middle East think of a Christian, what are they thinking of?
Yeah. A lot of times they think, because when you're born in the Middle East, you're born and like you're a Muslim, you're a follower of Islam. That's just expected. I think it's even on your birth certificate maybe. Yeah. And so for them, they kind of think Americans, oh, well, you're all born as Christians. The problem is that their experience with Christianity is what they see in TV, what they see on social media, what they see in other forms of media as well. And so what they see there is all Americans are they're Christians. They think they're all Christians, but what it means to be a Christian is just you party, you sleep around, you have sex, you have a good time. Yeah. And so when we were over there, like that's a barrier that we have to break down. And honestly, a lot of times, like they recommend not even using the word Christian because there's so much generalization surrounding that. Instead, using the word follower of Jesus and then giving them a true experience of what a follower of Jesus is. So they're going to assume when you come up that you're just wanting to party, you're wanting to have a good time, you're going to say inappropriate things. And so when you're just your real self, when you show holiness, when you show a love of God, you can see that it immediately breaks down barriers with them. And I think that's the same way here. Because honestly, a lot of people in the States and in the South Christianity, Bible Belt particularly, they just assume there's this cultural facade of Christianity. And so, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. I went to church. I was baptized at this age. And yet then they get around their non-believers or Christians who like to have a good time. And then the people who are so-called Christians act a completely different way.
Right.
And so it's not a surprise when you're sharing the gospel with non-believers a lot, especially if you've grown up in a Christian culture, they say things like, man, I don't want to be a hypocrite. Why would I do that? I'm just going to keep living the life the way that I am because I'm satisfied in that. I feel good. But man, I'm not going to say one thing and then just go and live another way.
Right.
And so we don't just see that in the Middle East. We see that here in the States too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's huge. So kind of getting into some of these points of being faithful in our relationships, priorities, finances, the actual points that he said were get our relationships, priorities, finances in order. I wanted to jump in a little bit on these. One of the other questions we got, Jeff tends to reference families and marriage and parenting a lot in his messages because he's a grandparent. He's got kids who are parents, and so there's a large number of our people who are parents, but there's also a population of our family who are single, and so they may hear some of those things and not I don't think they necessarily take offense to them, but just to kind of clarify, one of the points that Jeff made was one of the greatest ways that we can show and share and display our relationship with Jesus is in our families or in our parenting or in our marriages. So question coming from that, how do we display our relationship if you're a single person?
Yeah. I've been chatting a lot. Do you have thoughts on that, Patty?
We're used to Jeff chatting a lot. So it's okay.
Okay, yeah, I feel bad because I've been chatting.
That's true.
But I'm thankful that you guys invited me because you're hitting at some like passions and some things that I just like. I love getting after.
I immediately just looked at you for response.
Yeah, I'm sorry I asked you on a question that you weren't ready to go for. But yeah, I would say first, man, I want to apologize to the single people who are in our church or really a part of the kingdom of God. If there's any other listeners out there who aren't a part of the church, that's so weird. That's a little cheesy.
But I should have made a cheese button. I've got the bleep, but
that's like that's kind of like canceling button.
Yeah,
I don't know what cheese would be, but I feel like because of the church's desire and even our church as Emmanuel, like, man, we love the family. We believe in it. We believe in marriages. We believe in raising up the next generation of disciples of Christ through faithful children, through faithful grandchildren. At times when we emphasize things so much in those areas, whether we communicate it or not, we can communicate that being single is either secondary or even inferior. And the reality is that the Bible says completely opposite.
Yes.
I mean, you look at what Jesus says, you look at what Paul says. Jesus, I think it's in Mark 12, when the Sadducees or Pharisees or something are trying to stump him and ask him a question about the resurrection, he ends up going in and saying that marriage is temporary. Like, you're not going to be married in heaven. And so while we make this thing the preeminent, there's one of those big words. That's kind of a Bible word. When we make something kind of a higher level than it's supposed to be, I love how kind of Jesus puts them and then puts us in our place a little bit. Because the reality is that marriage is only temporary. But the thing that marriage is pointing toward is what he's ultimately after, which is God's love for his church and his bride, which that is eternal. Yeah. And so Jesus says that, and then Paul obviously takes it another level. I think it's in 1 Corinthians, where he's talking about marriage and sex and saying that those things. Does Jeff ever say sex on the podcast?
I don't think so.
Is that weird?
I should have used the.
I think I've already said it a few times, but Paul talks about marriage and sex, how those are good gifts that we're supposed to have. I think like my headphones just like blurted out a little bit.
We need a disclaimer before this is aired.
God talks about marriage and the things that you can experience in marriage. Well, Paul talks about it, God through Paul. And Paul says that those are gifts. Those are great gifts that we're supposed to experience. But then he goes on, and if we truly believe that the Bible is inerrant and inspired and infallible, like Jeff talked about a couple weeks ago, he goes on and encourages people actually to remain single as he was.
Yeah.
And he encourages them to remain single because for married people, the reality is that our mind oftentimes is on the things of the world more, and our mind is often on providing for our marriages and providing for our families if God gives us those. Yep. Marriage and having kids, like I got 4 kids. If you want to have a good marriage and good kids and good family life, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's a gift because it brings a lot of good things. Like I'm able to engage in the mission of God differently because I'm married and because I have kids, and I'm able to get around some people and have real conversations with them and transfer those to spiritual conversations because I am married and I have kids.
Yeah.
And praise God for that. It's a gift. I love my wife. I love my kids if they're listening. My kids probably aren't listening, but my wife is. Maybe.
I hope they're not because you're saying bad words.
I love them.
Yeah,
I love doing premarital counseling. That's true. This is a PG-13 podcast. Whenever Fun John's around, it can get PG-13. But I love my wife. I love doing premarital counseling. I love marrying people and walking through all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the scriptures is that marriage or that singleness is encouraged. And it's because, man, those people have a way not just to get through life or to get to the point that they get married and then they can live a true Christian life.
Right.
The reality is that singleness should be something that's leveraged because you have so much more time and energy to be able to devote not only to your relationship to God, but your relationship to the church and then engaging in the mission of God. Like thinking about going to the Middle East a couple weeks ago, like you going to New York, like all the things that we had to think through to prepare to go on that trip. Like, man, how's my wife going to be? How are my kids going to be? Where are they going to stay? What are they going to eat? How are they going to be taken care of? Like when I was single, it was like, oh yeah, some guys want to hang out or go play basketball at midnight. Right. Yeah, I'm in.
Absolutely.
If I got that asked now, it would take like 5 different conversations before I got to the point that I was able to say yes. Yep. And so singleness, just like marriage, is a gift, and it's something that God causes us to leverage. Yeah. And so I'm grateful for our single brothers and sisters in the church. I hope that they would see the gift that it is that they're single, and maybe God's called them toward that their entire lives, and maybe he's just called it toward them for a season. Yeah. But either way, for them to begin viewing that as a gift, and for them to begin viewing that as something that they're supposed to leverage, not to look down on. And that's probably easy for me to say. I'm thinking about what I would think if I was listening to this married dude who has 4 kids say all these things. That's easy for me to say on this side because I didn't feel like I was called towards singleness. But if we really do believe the truth of the scriptures and what Jesus says and what Paul says, then we got to live like we believe that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of this idea of being faithful in our relationships. I think if I was, you make a good point. We're a bunch of married people with kids that are talking about singleness. Yeah. But you know, with us being called to be faithful in our relationships or being faithful in our singleness, God's called any of us in any situation that we're in to be faithful in that. And so, you know, it would be extremely easy if you're someone who is single and wants so desperately to have a relationship or have a marriage or have kids, and so longs for that. It would be so easy for that to become a place of bitterness or to struggle deeply with that, especially when you hear everything about families and kids and see how the kids are around. But at the same time, man, like you said, what a fantastic opportunity that you have so much more time, so much more energy that you can devote to pouring into others, pouring into making disciples, and then, as you know, if it's part of His plan for you to come across that person and to get married and have kids, then be faithful in that in the next phase. But be faithful where you're planted. I also think for Jeff, talking about getting into the marriage side and the relationship side, that was really an example of being faithful in our relationships. So for a large majority of the people in the room, some of the key relationships in their lives are their marriage and their kids. And so that's a huge place, that thing that God's given us, like I just said, to be faithful in. So be faithful where you're planted, and be faithful with what you've been given. And so it's a very challenging thing, but I 100% agree. It's not about waiting till you get married to be able to do this, but being faithful where you're
regardless, commit ourselves to following the movement of God. Is something that Jeff really hit on Sunday. And that resonated with me, because I'm in a different phase of life than you guys. My kids are older, and I've got a grandbaby now. I like him a lot.
Leo.
What's your grandma name again?
Coco.
Coco.
Yeah.
That's so Patty, so fun.
Yeah, so me. Chocolate is like one of my favorite things ever. So
I'll probably have a super boring grandfather name like Grandpa.
Yeah, or cheese.
Yeah, or cheese. That'd be awesome.
Big John.
Big John.
That'd be fun.
Big Gouda.
And then,
Big
so you're
Gouda.
Coco. What you wanted Joey to be?
I wanted Joey to be Puffs,
Puffs.
Which would be
Cocoa
awesome.
but he
Puffs.
said no.
But
See what you're doing there.
Joey's not a puff.
Is he waiting for the grandchild to decide what his name is
He's
still?
thrown out some very
Oh,
standard names,
Yeah.
but
Paw
ultimately, PAW.
Paul.
Yeah.
Paw Paw is like the most North Carolina grandpa
It
name.
is
Is
so-
that what your
Grandpa's
grandpas
name,
are? Both of them?
I had actually, it was Paw Paw George and Paw Paw. It was just Paw Paw and Paw Paw George.
It's not
And
Paw
then I
Paw,
had-
though. It's Paw Paw.
PAW, PAW.
Yeah.
Yep. And then my grandma, one of them is Maul, MAW, and the other one was Maul Maul.
W. You got to say W when you're
You gotta-
spelling that.
That was it.
Oh.
So, yeah, I was going somewhere with that phase of life.
Sorry, we
Yep,
got you
you're in a
off.
different
That's
phase
okay.
of life.
Now I'm thinking about Leo. So, yeah, that's not a bad thought at all.
No.
So I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. And as a grandparent, like I love Jeff kind of thinking through that a lot differently now as he's a grandparent.
Right.
But just because your kids are gone doesn't mean that your best years of discipleship are behind you. The reality is that even as a grandparent, as an empty nester, it's not like you're single again, but it's kind of like you're getting some of your time back, even some of your money back. And so I think grandparenting oftentimes is the best years of discipleship in your life, because you do have that experience in your life. You've learned those lessons. You see what really matters. You see where your ultimate satisfaction and treasure is in. So you get to do that if you have the gift of grandkids, but you also get to do that with unbelievers as well.
Yeah.
And so I love that.
Yeah.
It's true. I keep grandbaby on Fridays, and there was a couple in our church a couple of months ago. The husband had an unexpected heart surgery. So obviously we've been through that. And so they were on my mind a lot.
Yeah.
And so I was called to pray for them at very different hours than I probably would have chosen. But I was literally holding baby Leo and just looking at him and saying, it's our job to pray for this person. And so we're literally praying. And I sent the wife a picture of Leo, and I said, we've prayed for you. This little nugget is what I call him, little nugget. We've prayed for you guys today. And she said, to this day, she still has that little picture. And she said, it just meant more to me than anything I received that day, was just that sweet little picture of prayer. Can start at any age, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So be faithful in your relationships. Second was be faithful in your priorities. Jeff kind of got into this a little bit in Nehemiah. They're more focused on making money, right, than their relationship with God in this chapter. And so when he was talking about this, one of the things that's easy to think is, well, if God's given us all these things, there's so many things in the world, but we're saying that we can't do any of these things. Does God call us to just not have any fun at all, or can we actually have fun in this life? So Yeah, what do y'all think?
Yeah, we're supposed to be real boring. No, I think like
boring, lame Christians.
Oh,
boring, lame Christians. Yeah, that's why you invited me on the podcast, right?
Exactly.
Zinger. I'm just giving all the.
Gotcha.
I'm just giving all you guys the zingers. But
got yourself.
but yeah, I think God is. I think God is hilarious. Like when I read the Bible, a lot of times when I think about like how He created humans and our bodies to work, like I think God is funny. And I think He creates us to have fun and to have joy. The question is where are we finding that joy, and how is it that we are having fun in our lives? And so a lot of times we just naturally, in our flesh, I think, we connect having fun with the things of this world, as opposed to seeing like Psalm 16, one of my favorite passages, that says that there's fullness of joy, there's pleasures forevermore for Christ followers in eternity, but that also that we get a glimpse into now. And so God gives all of us passions, things that we love, things that we get joy in. Maybe for you, that's relationships, it's your kids, it's your spouse, it's your best friends, it's the games that you like to play, the sports that you like to play, the things that you like to read. And I think He created us to find those things, joy in things. I think His desire ultimately in all things is for His own glory. And so the things that we find joy in here, whatever that is supposed to point us toward our ultimate joy in Him. Because no matter what it is that we find our joy or our satisfaction or our treasure in this earth, ultimately all of those things are going to leave us hanging and leave us wanting more, because they're going to disappoint us in some way, which is why that all ultimately points us to the joy that we find in Christ. So,
which is our strength.
Which is our strength. So, yeah, absolutely. We should have fun. We should find joy. We should find that particularly in the community that God gives us in His church. Like, we shouldn't just be walking around all the time, just mopey, blah, 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 blah. Like that was I think that was in a Nehemiah passage recently that we studied a couple weeks ago. Like when Ezra gets up and reads the Word of God, and all the people's response is they listen really intently, but then at the end of the section, it talks about how they were like crying and like grieving. And Nehemiah is like, no. Like you don't need to grieve. You don't need to cry. You need to rejoice. And the reality for all of us when we read the Bible, when we study hard passages, when we're convicted, like, man, we should be repentant over sin, but ultimately that should move us toward a thankfulness for our Savior and a joy in what He's done for us in Christ. And so as we come to church services, that means that we should be celebratory. As we study the Bible, that means we should be celebratory. Because we read the Bible, we worship God a lot differently being on this side of the cross than maybe the Old Testament folks did. That's one of your go-to words.
You say folks?
You like to say folks.
Do I say that?
You emphasize the L. You say folks. There's one thing I noticed about you really quickly. You don't know this about yourself.
I don't. I've
That's
been
fun.
enlightened.
The podcast is
Now I'm ashamed.
The podcast is a glass shattering moment. You don't need to stay in shame though.
Okay, I need to rejoice.
Rejoice.
If
you're not perfect.
If
Humility.
it makes you feel any better, me and Rachel and Mike went to Town Square one day, a few months ago. And
you like Town Square?
I love it.
Oh, really?
I eat there multiple times a week.
Oh, yeah.
I would probably eat there every day if I had money.
Yeah, I know. I'm being sarcastic because Cameron loves Town Square.
It's so good.
It would bring him joy.
The hot chicken grilled tacos. Cameron's
Gotta get them
go-to.
grilled. They're a little hotter when they're grilled, not fried. But yeah, it's good stuff.
Does
But
the
we went
podcast world know about your like weird ability to eat hot things and them not be hot?
I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe not.
Cameron's incredible. Patty is the exact opposite.
John.
Yes,
Patty,
I am.
just in your ability to eat hot things, not in other things.
Someone may have
Great.
purchased him the one chip challenge
He
Yes.
did.
for his
That ended-
birthday.
that-
Someone may have done that.
That ended up a little bit difficult, though, I know.
That was amazing.
Patty, however, I remember one of my first experiences hanging out with Patty was we went to eat, what's that place over in Donaldson that we went to eat at? The
Party
hot
Fowl.
chicken place,
Yeah,
Party
that's what I
Fowl.
was gonna say.
And Patty got a 0 and she had to send it back
I
because it
sure
was too
did.
hot.
Sure did.
But you were
Meanwhile-
like legitimately uncomfortable, I could tell.
Yep.
Meanwhile, I got Poultrygeist, which
Yeah.
is their highest one.
Cameron got the hottest
like,
thing, and he
this
was
isn't even
completely
hot.
fine. And I think I got like mild, which is normally what I get, and I was slightly glistening. So
Yeah,
Cameron's-
slightly glistening.
Cameron's taste buds or receptors are just completely gone.
it doesn't
No,
make sense.
they work fantastically.
Fantastic.
I love it.
Nice.
Nice. I don't know what we were getting into before I got off on that.
Your lunch
Don't
with
either.
Rachel
Oh.
and Mike.
I was just going to give Mike a hard time because he was talking about someone's salad and he said something about the yolks being gone.
Yolks.
And me and Rachel both stopped
What?
and got onto him so hard because he said something about the egg yolks. And it was like he choked on his own word, yolk.
Yeah.
Never forget that. So when you
Yolk
said
and
folks, it reminded me of that.
You know what? You know why I do that now that I'm thinking of it? I'm going to justify
Go for
myself
it.
right now, right? I'm digging out. I taught a music appreciation class for many years at our homeschool tutorial. And one of the sections of music that I taught was folk music.
Okay.
And there's an emphasis on
See,
the
that's correct
L,
when you say
Yeah,
folk.
you don't say
right?
folk.
You don't say
You don't say
folk.
folk music, right? Folk music. So
That's true.
now you have it.
That's true.
Boom.
I'm pretty sure
Folks.
I asked Rachel, though, and she says yoke, but she also says, I think she says folk, which is also, anyways, we'll move on from this conversation. But I probably explained the whole priorities things terribly, but I pulled up Jeff's notes to read what he said, and this makes a lot more sense. But when he wrote down, kind of reading through verse 31 in Nehemiah, he said the Israelites had allowed themselves to fall into the trap of believing that what the world had to offer was more valuable than what God provided. And so now we are living in a time where we see families often neglecting the house of God for what the world offers. And so I think going along with what you said, John, it's not about not having fun or not doing all these things. Like we're not supposed to just go home and not watch the football game because we're supposed to be reading our Bibles. If you're reading your Bible, that's a great thing.
You can do both at the same time.
I can't.
can't either. I'm just
I'm
joking.
not a multitasker. But like watching the football game is fine. Reading your Bible is great. It's about where the priority is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why the key of that point is being faithful with your priorities. It's not about not having fun or not doing the things, but are we doing the things for our pleasure, for what we can get out of it? Or is our priority in the place that it should be, to where our focus is going and making disciples, doing what we're called to do. And Jesus is the ultimate priority. We still do these things. We still have fun. We still enjoy life. We still have great relationships and go do things with friends. But even when we're going to do those things, if our priorities are right, we're still looking for, recognizing opportunities that we can share the gospel, share God's love, show the world who he is and what he's called us to do. And so, yeah, it's ultimately more of priority than just living a boring life and not having fun.
True.
Yeah. God gives us a lot of good things to experience in life. Our problem is when those good things become the ultimate things.
Yeah.
And we try to find our satisfaction and our joy in them. But God in his grace creates it where none of those things are ever going to get us to be fully satisfied. And that's when we have to lean in him more, is when we recognize that.
That's
But we're
good.
so stupid and we do it over and over and over again. So
That was good. That was a great little.
Is that a great
seminary
ender?
Yeah, that was fantastic.
did you say that was seminary?
It was. It was. I mean, you just talk very eloquently,
Yeah.
so it's very punctuated. It's not a bad thing.
Okay.
It wasn't cheesy.
I appreciate that.
It was
It
just,
wasn't cheesy. That's good. That's good.
Last point: keeping our finances in order, or being faithful with our finances. I love what Jeff said with this. Kind of the idea, we still have this idea of the tithe in our minds, of the 10% of what we give to the church, 10% of what we own or what we receive, give back to the church. But I love when he was talking about the 10% and the 90%. He said, how you spend the 90% will say more about your relationship with Jesus than how you spend or how you give the 10, which I think is, that deserves
gets
a
a good.
Baptist. Yeah.
Good.
That's good.
And so, we've talked about the relationship side of that, being in a relationship with Jesus, how that drives our generous giving, not just the 10%. We're not bound to the law of the tithe anymore. But when we talk about giving, it's often, if not always, about giving to the church. And so in just this idea of giving back to the Lord, are we just always referring to giving to the church, or are there other ways that we can give back to God?
I see what you guys did here, inviting the finance money guy to be here for this
Executive pastor for
question.
the money
This
question.
is a very executive question. I love it.
We thought about a different song for you, John.
Oh, you did? What song was that?
Money.
Money,
Wow.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was beautiful.
Yeah,
You guys
right.
are such good singers.
Let's hear you sing it.
Yeah.
Money, 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 money.
Oh,
Get a little Bee Gees in there.
Nice.
That's a long-term inside joke with me and Jeff.
that's
that
fun,
goes
John.
back
Bee
to when
Gees?
I was 19.
Yeah.
That's about a 15-year-old joke. So Jeff will love that if he listens to this and
Nice.
ever allows me to come back on again.
Probably not. It's all right.
Man, that's right.
One and done.
You're doing a
Yeah,
great
but
job.
I think
No.
back to the question that really, as Christians, our whole lives are meant to be around giving.
Yeah.
When we give our lives to the Lord, when we become Christ followers, we're surrendering our lives to Him, giving our lives to Him, saying that His plans, His purposes for our lives are better than anything that we could run out on our own. And then our whole life is about giving ourselves of Him for His glory and ultimately His kingdom.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we give of our time, we give of our gifts, we give of our service. We also give of our resources.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we like crutches as Christians. So whenever money comes up in the Bible, it's like, oh yeah, I need to give my money, but I also give my time. I give other resources. I give my service. And I think that all those things are awesome, and we're supposed to give of all those things. But there's a reason in the Bible that Jesus talks more about money than He talks about marriage and heaven and hell and sex. I said it again.
Oh, man.
There's a reason that He talks about money more than all of those things, because money really shows where our treasure is. And ultimately, God is after us treasuring Him more than anything else.
Yeah.
And He's after our hearts. And money has a way of showing where our hearts are, probably more than pretty much anything else I can even think of.
Yeah.
Money shows what you find your comfort in. It shows what you want to control, what you find satisfaction in. And so that's why Jesus talks about it so much, I think, because ultimately He's after our hearts, and money shows where our hearts are. And so that point that Jeff made about the 90% showing a lot of times more than the 10% is so true, because how we spend the money that we think we have ownership over really shows what it is that we believe about God, and shows whether we believe that we actually have ownership over the money, or whether we're just, here's another good Christian word, whether we're stewards over that money. But I really believe, man, Jeff's been
Still looking for Stuart.
Jeff's
I
been
haven't
helping
found
me
Stuart.
think. You're still looking for Stuart?
Yeah.
Stuart's a good guy. Jeff's with Stuart right now.
Yeah, he is.
But yeah, we're called to be stewards, which means we really are managers of the money. God doesn't need our money.
Yep.
He's after our hearts ultimately. And so, yes, give of your time, give of your resources, go on mission trips, serve on our guest services team, on our kids team, in our creative arts teams. Those are all great things that God gives us joy when He gives us His Spirit. He gives us spiritual gifts. We're supposed to serve His kingdom with that. All that's going to give us joy. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
But also, I would say not just do all those things and don't give of your money.
Right.
Because you're losing out on something that Jesus calls you to surrender to Him, which ultimately is best for you, which ultimately is going to bring you the joy and the satisfaction that you might be trying in the money that He gives you.
Yeah, I think that's spot on because it's so tangible. You know, a lot of when we talk about giving, a lot of people think of their time, their talents, and their what's the other T?
Resources, treasures.
Treasures. There it is. Yeah, I knew there was a T. Time,
good.
talents, and treasures. And all of those things are important to give back to God. They're all ways
Absolutely.
that we can give back to God, and we're called to do that. But our finances are such a tangible way that we can give back to Him and trust Him with something that, in all reality, we need in this world. Like to make it through this life, there's a mortgage, there's a car, you know, like there's things that we need here in America on this earth to get through life, and money is required for that. Food. Simple, like, but it's such a tangible way that when we put that in God's hands and trust Him with it, and I think that's where that 1090 is so key, because yes, we should be trusting Him and giving sacrificially to the church and and that's the church, little c and big C. That's giving to the church in a regular capacity, Emmanuel Baptist Church or whatever church you go to that you're listening to, the local church, but also when there are other believers, the local body, when there's other believers that are in need, being able to give, like if you have the ability to give and to help financially with those people, that's another great way that we're giving back to God. And so, when I was just talking to Jeff last night, that was one of the big things he said is, you know, and you said it too, you said about everything I was going to say. But one of the biggest ways that we can put our trust in God is with our finances, because it's something that's so tangible and what we need. And then in that passage, the parable of, I forget which one it is, but the one in Luke, when it says you've been, be faithful in the small things, and I know you'll be faithful in much. At the end of that passage is where it says you can't serve both God and money. It doesn't say you can't serve both God and fill in the blank of whatever. Yeah. But it says you can't serve both God and money. That's because it's such a tangible, practical thing that we need that can control so many things in our life if we don't keep it under control. And so as we serve God, as we strive to keep those priorities in place, our finances are a great indicator of how we're doing that.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's not a surprise that the Lord is putting us in this season now as a church when he's bringing us so much unity, and how that's connected to our For Generations to Come campaign. We're talking about money. We're talking about stewardship a lot, and people are wrestling with that, and they're surrendering their money to the Lord in a way that's causing them to be more generous in other areas of their lives, I would imagine. But it's not a surprise that those things are connected, because people are depending on God in a fresh way for their finances, and they're getting joy out of that. So I would imagine that they're probably starting to be, I noticed this in my own heart, I'm not generous by nature. I want to have control. I want to know where my money's going, and I want it to go toward things that I want it to go to.
Right.
But it's amazing how making the commitment to the campaign has caused me to be more generous, not only with my finances, but with all of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how the Lord is going to stir that faith more in our people as they're giving of their finances toward the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Campaign plug. Executive pastor. Boom.
Well, John, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Just know that
It was fun.
We love Work John, but we really like Fun John.
John.
We just like Real John.
Real John.
You know, because you're a very eloquent person. You put sentences together great, but we like you to be down to earth with us too.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Was I a little down to earth at all today? Or was
You were
it
great.
just-
Yeah, it was good.
Okay,
you had
good.
your moments, but
There's been a lot of bad talk about seminary in our conversation today. Like being seminary has been a burn.
Well, I just hate on it because I didn't finish seminary. So
that's
here we
true.
are. So
Yeah. I love seminary. Seminary was huge.
Yeah.
But you can be. That's one of those kind of Christianese type places that you could get just surrounded by Christians all the time and then cannot relate to other people. So
100%.
that's where the seminary burn comes from at times.
Seminary is extremely
Seminary is
valuable.
an awesome place. I'm glad I was able to go. It was wonderful.
Good deal.
It's good.
Well, yeah, it is good. It is all good.
It is good. And on that note,
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, just to kind of wrap it up, is that idea of faithful in the small things, I'll make you rulers over much. Or faithful in the small things, you'll be faithful in the big things. And so whatever you're walking through, whatever you have, whatever you've been given, be faithful in those things. Be faithful where you're at, where you've been planted, whether it's your job, your talents, you use those for God's glory. I see so many people who have such great talents, but they're locked into a world that they feel like they can't use them. Use your talents for God's glory. Use the spiritual gifts that God's given you for his glory and to benefit the church. I think we push a lot of those things down, unfortunately, but God's given you things to give back to him for his glory and to be faithful with. So that's my encouragement for me, for us, for everyone listening. So be faithful in the small. He'll make you rulers over much. So there you go.
there's probably a song that connects to that. That would be a good segue off the podcast today, but I can't think of it.
Yeah. We should play the Big John
Big
song.
Bad John.
That was good. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.